Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Green Rush Live, our regular Friday afternoon business of cannabis show that we run here on the Pro Cannabis Media Network. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. And every half hour, I've got to do this reminder again. Please like, share, and subscribe, not just to this show, but all of the Pro Cannabis Media content that's out there. We're about 480, I think, subscribers away from getting to the 10,000 mark on YouTube. So if you happen to be watching this on YouTube and you're not a subscriber, please do. We will not hit you up with anything because we won't get that data, which is another story for another day. But right now we're talking about lobbyists, and we've got a great panel of lobbyists in with us, along with Josh Kincaid, who's a regular with us and our Washington State correspondent for our Weed Talk News show that follows this every Friday at 6 o'clock. Let me introduce everybody, Josh, and then I'm going to throw it right back to you. As someone who's a regular, and we so appreciate his regular appearances here on Green Rush Live, is Michael Correia from the NCIA, the Director of Government Relations. Michael, great to see you again.
Hey, Jimmy, nice seeing you. And just to let you know, I'm on vacation out in California, and normally I'd say no, but for you, I got the call and I was like, I'll do this. So, hey, that's the power of Jimmy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a very sensitive guy. That means a lot to me. I really do. Chris, you are with the Marijuana Policy Project. Tell me a little bit about exactly what you do, and then we'll go to Amy. Go ahead.
Sure. So I'm the new guy here. Very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. So Marijuana Policy Project is most often out in states doing state work, whether that's passing medical cannabis or adult use laws. It does it either through lobbying directly at the legislative level or through voter initiatives. I had the good fortune to work in the lobbying division under Karen O'Keefe, who some of our, or maybe many of our listeners may know of. She's very often involved in this at the state level. So did that in many states. I guess the most recent of mine was in Illinois to help sort of get it across the finish line for legalization. And most recently I've been involved in the federal stuff, which leaves me to rub elbows with Mr. Correia here and get to know kind of what's going on in DC and how far the goalposts actually are in all this. So again, happy to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Great, appreciate it. Now, I'm interested to hear the state perspective versus the federal perspective too. Amy Jenkins is next. Amy, tell us about your organization and why you're here too.
Well, I'm here because you invited me.
That's true.
So hopefully I'll make a contribution to this conversation. So, but appreciate the opportunity, and it's always nice to see Michael and Chris. Nice to meet you. So I own a firm in Sacramento, Precision Advocacy, and I represent a number of cannabis clients in California, including the California Cannabis Industry Association, which represents about 400 members currently, over 750 brands, and about 15,000 employees. So we are the most influential, I would say, trade association right now. There are others that are lobbying the state capitol to enact different cannabis reform endeavors, including tax reform, which is the big conversation right now. So I also have some individual clients. I also represent California companies, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Terrific. Josh, I'm going to throw it to you for the first comment, questions, and you could call on any one of these three guests for us. Go ahead.
All right. So lobbying last year broke an all-time mark amid a flurry of government spending industry. They topped $3.7 billion for the first time. That's up from $1.5 billion in 2001, with 3,700 new companies and organizations hiring lobbyists since the start of the pandemic, bringing the total number of lobbyists in Washington to an estimated 12,000. With so many multiple in-state lobbyists in Washington state, any state for that matter, how do we make any progress with so many different agendas? I guess I'll start with Michael.
So that's one of the biggest issues I'm dealing with now. You know, when I started, which was 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago, is before there were legal sales in Washington state and Colorado. That happened in January and July of 14, and I started in 13. I was the only guy there. I was on an island by myself trying to lobby. And the issue is pretty uniform. Take the industry seriously. We wanted a professionalization of the industry. We wanted to talk about the banking issue, the taxes. It was very generic. It was very easy talking about it because I was the only one doing it. Well, now the industry has matured. And here we are, 9 years, 10 years later, we have bigger MSOs, we have medium-sized companies, we have smaller, we have different aspects where some of them may have a little different perspective when it comes to what does legalization mean. And a perfect example would be something like interstate commerce. If you're a big MSO that invested hundreds of millions of dollars in a state-based model, and all of a sudden legalization threw that open, your hundreds of millions of dollars of investment would maybe go out the window. And so there's a little different perspective as far as tax rates, regulations, how much you can deal with on regulations, how much you can pay on taxes. The bigger guys can do more than smaller guys. And it gets back to economics of big versus little in every other industry. And the industry, cannabis industry, has changed. It's matured a lot. You see a lot of consolidation in the industry, a lot of growth. And when I was talking, it was, hey, treat us like every other business in America. Address the banking issue, address the tax issue. And that was it. Well, we've gotten none of that. And now they're talking about legalization. What does legalization look like? What do regulations look like? And now that's where you're seeing some of these differences pop up. And that's just within the industry. And then you have industry sort of versus advocacy in their approaches about drug legalization, drug reform. So when you're on Capitol Hill, one of the things I always wanted to do was have one unified message. This is the cannabis industry, and this is what we want. And now there's little nuances, a little popping up. So you are a friend on Capitol Hill that wants cannabis reform. You hear one perspective and you go, sounds good to me, and then you support it. And it may not be the full picture. And that's one of the things I'm fighting for right now, is just representing the industry as a whole, not one company, not big companies, but just the industry as a whole. But you're starting to see those nuances pop up in different ones, and having Capitol Hill hear different voices, it's a challenge.
To your point, Michael, I just talked to the CEO of Riv Capital, who spent $250 million going to New York. And I said, you must know something we don't, because you wouldn't spend that if you thought legalization was going to happen.
Yeah.
Amy, you're nodding your head. Do you have anything that you want to add to Michael's comments?
Well, I was certainly relating to, I think, the fragmentation of the industry. I mean, I think when we first started lobbying in Sacramento, we were all a unified voice. And I think we're all continuing. When I say we, it's the different associations and different stakeholder groups. I think we are trying to align ourselves around some key policy objectives, but I certainly appreciate the situation that Michael described, because I'm experiencing that in real time in California. You have small farmers, you've got different associations that are springing up to represent different segments of the supply chain. You've got multiple new equity associations. So it's very, very hard to find alignment when you have so many competing interests. But I also want to go back to your prior initial question about how do you penetrate? Like, how do you make your voice heard when there are so many competing interests? And the way I started was, as Michael said, you normalize, but the other thing I did is you have to tell a story from a local district perspective. And so I had to go one district at a time and really figure out what made that policymaker tick and how cannabis was relevant to their district. So low-hanging fruit were legacy communities that have already accepted cannabis in those communities. But then when I had a legislator that was very pro law enforcement, that's where you focus on, unlicensed market versus licensed, and how you can regulate and control and reduce crime. But, my strategy was always, really trying to identify what is going to make that particular policymaker tick. And I continue to do that to this day. But as cannabis has become more normalized and we're generating significant revenue in California, it has become far more mainstream. So most legislators let me in the door, but it really started out with that level of basics.
And Chris, how about you?
Well, the longer we go, the more complicated it gets. So those interests, just as Michael outlined, get more specific. And I just go back to a really simple analogy. And it's when, in World War II, at the very beginning, it wasn't hard for people to sort of rally around the idea that Hitler's a bad guy and we need to deal with this. Yeah. But on the other end of that same war, it's not about whether or not it's a good idea. It's about, how are we splitting up Germany? How are we going to manage the situation? And that's kind of the situation where legalization is upon us. 37 states have some program in place where their citizens get access on a regular basis, and there's an industry that supports them. We just have done it badly because the federal government hasn't done anything yet. And so, we don't really debate anymore whether or not we should. We just sort of have to deal with all of the messiness along the way. And the longer we go, the more entrenched interests get, because that's what happens. You create a system and businesses start operating in that system. They didn't make the rules, they just work in the system. And the minute they get operating, they get attached to the system that they operate within. And so as soon as you then walk in and say, hey, everybody, you know what, that medical thing worked great. You know what we should do? Let's make it available to all adults. And that is obvious to folks that are in the advocacy space. But if you're a business, what you're now talking about is bringing in who knows how many, potentially a theoretically unlimited number of competitors, right? And so you're now in a situation where your early adopters, the ones that got in, are now very likely going to be finding ways to sort of make sure they're going to be taken care of throughout that whole process. And so now you have interests that start to diverge. And hey, anybody in the world can hire a lobbyist. That's easy. That just takes a checkbook, right? And so if you've got nervous CEO and you've invested at 1 point whatever in your grow, right? You want to make sure that you can continue to pay your staff. And so you're going to make sure that you've got the GR heft that you need to go to Sacramento or to, any state capital to try to keep that system in place. And what happens then is, as this whole thing develops over time, you have just different interests going different directions, and it's a mess. Because to where Michael exactly began is, it was one thing when it was simple and everybody could have one message, but you go into a lawmaker's office now and he or she will say, well, you know what, I talked to somebody last week and they kind of said some other thing. It's really, really hard now to try to move the needle when you've got so many voices. So it's a significant challenge.
And just to piggyback on what Chris was saying, which hit the nail on the head, is if you were to go from it's illegal and then tomorrow it was legal over the country, everyone was equal. Well, now, like California, it had these legacy operators for 25 years, this gray market. You had other states with medical. Well, now they have a footprint. So like in Arizona, they may want to control how many licenses are out there. Everyone, when you are on the outside, everyone loves capitalism. But when you're on the inside, everyone loves monopolies. And so it's hard to tell on where you're at. And there are multiple trade associations in cannabis at the federal level. We're all friendly. We all get along. We all agree on 95% of the same things. But there's going to be the slight differences of interstate commerce or a tax rate or excise taxes or something. And like Chris was saying, now you are protecting your interests. You are protecting your investment. You, as a CEO or manager of a company, you're looking at your time horizons and, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and making investments on that. And now all of a sudden Congress comes out and changes the rules mid-course. Well, that's going to affect you as a capitalist. And so we need this sooner rather than later, because if we have nothing, you will get a lot of consolidation of the industry. And then 4 years from now, when we have legalization, you will have these very big, powerful companies that don't want to play with others and don't want to open it up. But hey, that's why, Congress members get paid the big bucks and we keep fighting a good fight.
Did you just have a crystal ball prediction that legalization is going to happen in 4 years?
I heard the same thing. I heard 4 years by Michael. Didn't you, Josh? Did you hear that?
So my first event I did at NCIA, Earl Blumenauer spoke, and he said legalization by 2020. And 7 years seems so far away. I was like, yeah, it's possible. I viewed this as an 8 to 10 year process. So I had visions in 2013. legalization by the summer of 2021. Here we are in the summer of 2022, and we haven't gotten banking over. We haven't gotten 280E over. I've pushed my time horizon a little further back. And someone who worked in Congress before, never make predictions, Jimmy.
Right. Well, that's kind of like being a sports guy. You lose credibility as soon as you have the wrong prediction. Yeah. You have to be able to look at both sides, which is what I teach about a talk show host versus a journalist. Big difference. Guys, we had some breaking news this afternoon, and I want to get your opinions on it just to keep the conversation going. Merrick Garland, the U.S. Attorney General, had a quote out there. Tom Angel from Marijuana Moment reported on it, that the Department of Justice will address cannabis policy in the days ahead. Is that a tease? Is this encouraging? Are they going to reinstate the Coal Memo? Where do you think the DOJ is going to go? And Chris, we're going to start with you. Go ahead. Unmute yourself first.
Yeah, I don't know. And I thought you were going to say they said something, because we'd seen that they were going to say something.
Well,
I was like, oh boy. So
in the days ahead is the quote. In the days ahead is the quote.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I was definitely taken aback by the press release that Normal sent out, I think yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. That said, look, federal arrests are up. We've been kind of happy every year. They're trending down. And of course they would be, right? Because we've got more jurisdictions where they're actually limited in their enforcement capabilities. But those numbers really tell me that we're definitely not out of the forest yet. So I think it's easy to sort of be in this space because everybody that you talk to kind of loves what you're doing, and businesses are all excited, generally, and that we are in kind of an ecosystem of support, but it's not always really the case. So we'll see what happens. I hate to make any predictions about what the federal government's going to do.
No, if they do anything at all, it's a major news story. Amy, what's your reaction to this little piece of news? And it's more like a tease.
I would say it's more like a tease, but I tend to focus on state lobbying. And so where there's an impact at the federal level, obviously I track. I would imagine Chris and Michael have a better read as to what that might mean. In California, we're focused a lot on illicit market activity. There's also a lot of conversations around interstate commerce, as what was previously brought up. So there are some linkages there that might have some sort of correlation, but I think 4 years, as Michael subtly dropped, might be a more accurate prediction in terms of the direction of legalization. So yeah, it's tough to make predictions on what this means.
It's my only thinking. I maybe all the 25 years in DC, I've become a cynic, and all the times I've heard Chuck Schumer say he's going to drop his bill any day now. Yeah. 18 months later. You sort of, now when someone says something, I just shrug my shoulders and roll our eyes. And so, the first question you'd have to ask is, what can the federal government do? That's the first thing. And they're not going to legalize. They're not going to reschedule. They're not going to do anything major like that. So what could they do? Maybe they could tighten up the Coal Memo, maybe give some better guidance. Maybe they could tighten up the banking memo and make it a little easier on financial institutions. I know the Treasury Secretary and others have said something around banking, and maybe they realize Congress isn't going to do something on SAFE. Maybe they could tighten it up around that. They could do something around research. They could do something, around veterans, but there's not a lot they can do. And Joe Biden's been president for 18 months. He could have come in January and said, administratively, these are the things I want to do. Because I'm on vacation, I'm sort of a few days behind on everything. So if this was Merrick Garland, they're not going to say anything. And if he was quoted, yeah, they'll probably do something. And my guess it's a clarification around some administrative stuff versus anything major. That's just the way the federal government operates. And, maybe I'm more into the teasing. And we're going to be doing something to get you excited so then everyone else can talk about how the federal government's going to legalize cannabis.
Here's a quote for you from him that started this. Enforcement resources are not put to their best use prosecuting nonviolent, low-level marijuana offenses, even in jurisdictions where marijuana use remains illegal. This is a constant theme that I keep hearing from law enforcement for years now. They don't want to prosecute. They don't want to arrest any more people about cannabis because they don't want to fight for it more than anything else, especially in legal states.
If you look at the gist of the Coal Memo, which was what, Chris, 9 years ago, 8.5 years ago, something like that. And then in 2017, when Jeff Sessions tore up the Coal Memo, he basically said he was going to give priority, or he was going to allow the local state attorneys determine that. Now, I don't have the data. Has there been a ramp up in the past 5 years about arrests, and maybe they've seen some data and they're trying to refigure and now say it is not a priority, and then maybe do a new Coal Memo? I don't know, but I know we've lived in a world without coal for 5 years now, and I don't know what the arrests have done. I don't know if the others have get any enlightenment, but that's the only thing I could be thinking of.
And all Coal ever did was just say, here's our list of priorities. Hey, state or U.S. attorneys general out in the world, do whatever you think is appropriate. So, I mean, it never really dialed anything back. It just sort of gave enough room for US AGs out in the world to sort of say, well, okay, I'm not going to take this as a priority. There were certainly prosecutions that happened after that. So it's not like the whatever, I guess 2016 was when there was a limitation actually built into the budget that said DOJ does not get money to go after state compliant licensees, and that's meaningful.
On medical.
On medical, that's exactly right. And so now we have the Coal Memo, but my understanding is that nobody really changed policy when Sessions yanked the memo. I mean, I think it was sort of functional. At least it gave a place for banks to have some activity. So it didn't make any sense for anybody to just say, well, okay, forget it. They just sort of kept operating. And so I don't know, reinstating the Coal Memo, okay, so it doesn't really change anything. We need to change the law.
The next changes are going to be Congress. That's going to be the true changes of Congress changing laws.
Now, if anybody in the administration asked, I would say, oh, absolutely, we need to get that Coal Memo reinstated. But I mean, in the real world, at the end of the day, we're not seeing changes in people's lives because the memo is in place or not.
Yeah. Amy, you're in California, right?
I am.
Boy, you got plenty of stuff going on in that state every single day. It's the number one cannabis market, and I think 80% is still the illicit market, or the legacy market, if you will. Is California setting an example, or are they just making decisions and then kind of winging it once those decisions are made? I get no rhyme or reason out of California. Can you enlighten me?
Well, I would say that there are many things that we did not get right with the passage of Proposition 64, which was our measure to legalize cannabis for adult use. It's certainly job security for me, from the standpoint that I have spent the better part of my time since its passage in 2016 trying to steer the ship in the right direction and address some of the areas that are not entirely functional. So whether that is our very complex system of tax collection, the rate at which we're taxed, there's a lot of people that have real concerns and for better or for worse, but the reduction in penalties. So, the fact that cannabis, illicit cannabis is a misdemeanor has led to a huge uptick in unlicensed market activity. There's a whole host of issues that have been challenging. I will say where I think we are moving in a positive direction has been our significant investment in social equity. I think California is leading the charge in terms of trying to create a path for those communities most impacted by the war on drugs. But by and large, there is a lot to fix. And so hopefully the other states can learn from some of the the mistakes that we've made along the way. And so I think California continues to be a trailblazer in some respects, but also there are lessons in what not to do that I think other states should really pay attention to.
And just to piggyback on top of what Amy said, as a California native and actually in California right now, California led everything cannabis. I think it was sort of the leader on cannabis because it's such a big market. And there are a lot of lessons to learn on, what they did wrong. And one of the biggest issues is because you don't have federal legalization, you're going to have price differences. And California is growing some of the best stuff and at a good price because we have such an agricultural background. That's going to be leaking out of the market. There's going to be diversion until you have some equilibrium. I guarantee you, if you made tomatoes illegal across the country, there would be a illegal tomato market going on because California grows them well. It's just something about the market. But with that being said, I do want lessons being learned because what works, what doesn't, as far as taxes, higher taxes, regulations, there is no perfect legalization bill, but when Chuck Schumer is going to drop his bill, we as the cannabis industry are worried that these tax rates are going to be too high. It's not going to be good for the industry, and it's going to lead to this illicit market staying around because the taxes are too high. So you have to be, a lot of policy people in DC aren't thinking like that, but that's my job, is to educate and keep getting that message out of why we need to do legalization right, and the lessons we learn from states like California, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, some of these others that have been doing it for a few years now.
Right. We learn more from our mistakes. Hey, Josh, Washington, have they learned anything? Have you learned? I mean, it seems to me they're still kind of almost going back in time and redoing what they did 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think you learn more from your mistakes. Practice doesn't make perfect, failure does. And Washington State is probably the best learning experience. We are a petri dish experiment here. The most competitive marketplace in all of North America is right here in Washington State. 2,000 SKUs in any store and no vertical integration. So none of the stores care about the brands. They'll just put 2,000 SKUs up and then good luck competing against that. Granted, a lot of brands have, a dozen or so different brands with underneath them to kind of create all of those products. But what we're seeing is, still a Class C felony to maintain and operate a marijuana lounge. We're seeing it's a felony to grow at home unless you have a license, a medical marijuana card. So there's all kinds of issues in this state, and it's going nowhere fast.
Right. Hey, before we go, I do want to get a comment on interstate commerce, because it seems to me that interstate commerce does exist in the merchandising, in the branding. You are seeing brands going across state lines for edibles, for tinctures and other things like that, but not flower, at least not legally. But it still has to start with the flower. So, I mean, to me, it seems like some of these people that are putting out the products that are manufactured are already practicing interstate commerce. Am I wrong? Who wants to go?
I don't know. I mean, I would say this, that to a lot of folks that we talk to on the Hill, the folks that work, as staff for members of Congress, we're already doing interstate commerce. If you have a company that operates in one state and you have employees in another state, what are we talking about here? Is it the magic moment when a joint actually goes across state lines? Now we're gonna really have a problem with this company. There's stuff happening between these states all the time. Money is flowing. It's interstate commerce to a lot of folks already.
So I'll give you some anecdotal personal. So last summer I vacationed in Montana, Chris's state, and I flew in and out of Spokane, and there's a dispensary right on the Spokane, Idaho border. And I remember going there, I visited, and I think there were 40 cars in the parking lot, and 36 of them were from Idaho, which is probably has the least cannabis-friendly laws on the books. Idaho people are going to Washington State. They're just losing that that tax break. That, like Chris is saying, that's interstate commerce right there, because they're going across the state lines, and they're not consuming it in Washington. They're bringing it back to Idaho, because that's what's happening. It's just one of those things that you're going to get that leakage, that diversion, until the federal officials are having an honest discussion about cannabis.
There you go. Well, this has been a great, honest conversation about cannabis. The three of you have been outstanding. Michael, you're going to have some competition for your guesting here on the show. I can tell you that both Chris and Amy passed the test, and you will always have a special place in your heart for us, just because you're on vacation and you still made the time for us, and I appreciate that.
Hey, well, I always appreciate it. And Jimmy, we're going to hopefully do a lobby days in a couple of months and come into DC. So once you get the notice, come on down, visit us. It's been 3 years. People are getting an itchy trigger to want to go visit the Capitol, and we got to get Congress to do something before the end of this session.
Right. And I was at the last one in 2019 in May. And because my brother lives in Chevy Chase, it makes it somewhat convenient for me. But I'll be honest, I haven't seen him in 3 years except on Zoom, because they have grandkids. I mean, you know what happened, guys, more than anything else. Because we only have one guest in the next half hour, I'm going to offer, if you guys have time and want to stay, you certainly can. Michael, being on vacation, you're already excused, okay? So go and enjoy your time in your home state in California. And we're going to have more of Green Rush Live after this. Don't go away.
Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.